Joel Thibault, hello. Thanks for being our guest on Fair FM.
Hello, my pleasure.
So, Joel Thibault, let's talk a little bit more about who you are and why you're also well known, because you get the chance to follow spiritually one of our very own soccer world champion, Olivier Giroud. How did you get in touch with Olivier Giroud, and what led you to work with him?
It came about 8 years ago, while I was already supporting professional soccer players in their spiritual quests and discoveries of faith. It so happened that I accompanied a professional football player from the Team GF38 Grenoble. I was preparing him for his baptism. The connection was made because he knew Olivier Giroud from childhood, and Olivier was also looking for support. He was a little bit isolated. He was living in England back then, and that is how things naturally happened through exchanging messages until finally meeting up after Euro 2016's Cup.
So, Joel Thibault, you're a sports chaplain, but you've also been immersed in the field of football since you were a little kid. You played at the highest regional amateur level, and you got your coaching certificates. So how did you end up becoming exactly a chaplain specifically for top athletes?
Well, yeah, that wasn't actually really my original plan, since I was kind of flirting with the national level. With my team, we even got our ticket for the national third division, but for financial reasons, we couldn't make it. And I just kept doing my thing. I was also simply a student at the sports college. Everything was geared towards sports. Chaplaincy, I didn't know what that was. To me, God wasn't a priority at all. And I had put that aside, and then finally, I realized that sports couldn't make me truly happy, couldn't fulfill me completely, and that ultimately led me to a spiritual search which eventually brought me to discover the gospel. And it was quite a significant shake-up, and it was during my academic studies and at the end of my studies that there was a major shift to working with athletes. Back in 2005, actually, when I went to church, that's where I indeed met a professional soccer player and we started working together. And God since 2005 has prepared my heart to work with high-level athletes. But at first, I initially wanted to leave the really competitive sports world, which is extremely complicated, and focus more on the sports reintegration and the values of sports. And yeah, it was quite a long journey. And then, gradually, starting in 2011, God showed me that He wanted to put me back in the competitive scene because there were needs for spiritual support.
Joel Thibault, for a soccer player, is participating in the Olympics also the Holy Grail, or do they focus only on the Euro, the World Cup, etc.?
I think everything is good to learn, particularly when it's happening in Paris. I think the difficulty we see is that we don't necessarily have the best team on paper, but it also allows other players to participate. It's true that it's indeed less valued in football. That's really a bit harsh, isn't it? But it's kind of the reality when you look at the fiasco of the French team in Tokyo, for example. Here, we see that we don't have the best players, but that's great. That's the spirit of the Olympics. Originally, it was for amateur sports. Now few amateurs remain, but it allows those who are less likely to take part to dream and then find themselves in that atmosphere. Even if for soccer, they're not in the village yet, for now. That's also the magic of the event.
So today you're a chaplain in the Olympic Village. What does that actually mean, and how do your days go?
So for us, our days are paced with prayer, starting with personal prayer, collective prayer among chaplains because we depend on God, and then the meetings that God has planned for us. We don't have a set agenda. We're not simply here to just put on a performance. That's for the athletes to do, and we're here to welcome the athletes. There are times when it's quieter, and there are times when it's more intense. There are moments when a whole team may show up or half a team wants to join in on the celebration. There are nations where the Christian faith or the Muslim faith for others, like all religions that will be presented, can be very important and very unifying. We need to be there to welcome those moments. It's intriguing what you're saying. All religions are represented and present? Exactly. So, there are representatives of the Jewish faith, Hindus, Buddhists.
Do they manage to meet each other?
Well, everyone has their own uniqueness. We're human beings. We're here to share brotherhood. So, we're pretty tight-knit, pretty collective in what we've set up and in what we've asked. There are also common meetings to manage daily life and make necessary adjustments. So, there's a nice sense of solidarity among us.
You regularly meet young people to share your elite sports experience. What does regularly mean, and what kind of engagement are we talking about, Joel Thibault?
Yeah, I try to take this opportunity to go to middle schools and high schools, and even now to elementary schools. And it's a chance to share about the lives of these great champions because often we idealize or even idolize them, and we realize that no matter the champion, there's an emptiness in every man's heart. It's not the gold medals that fill a life, nor even a well-stocked bank account, even though we'd all like to have that in the end. We know we won't take it with us into eternity either. There's a quest for meaning, and for sure it also affects athletes who take the time to pause and not fill their lives with a bunch of artificial stuff. But when you become famous in sports, there's a whole system in which you get caught up in it. But we see forms of redemption in different ways in the sports world, and that's also what I share with the youth. And then to see a high-level athlete's life isn't all sunshine and rainbows. It requires resilience, courage, perseverance, values you find in the Bible too.
And often after the championships or the Olympics, there's a phase of depression for athletes. Is that when you step in to help them?
Yeah, there are phases of decompression that can switch to phases of depression. It can happen during those times. Afterwards, it's sometimes indeed tough because the athlete can be proud and keep it to themselves, trying to handle it alone. So yeah, the advice we can give is that we're stronger if we're together and also with this confidentiality. To be able to support and help them and to realize that there's a way to truly get through it and that it's also part of life's events to go through these tough and challenging times.
Is it indeed the relationship you have with them that eventually allows them to open up and really benefit from what you can offer them?
It's about having a relationship where, in a way, I do not expect anything at all from them. I do not demand anything whatsoever from them. And then it's a free relationship that needs to be built on trust so they can share. So, it's absolutely crucial to have the space and time for them.
And the family environment is also important during those times. The community.
The family environment is super important, and it's indeed very true that for those who have a local church, it can play a very significant role if the church doesn't pressure them or try to take advantage of them, and rather be a source of encouragement and helps them go beyond just sports. Athletes really appreciate it when you talk to them about things other than sports.
But how does the church, because what you're saying is really interesting, how does the local church add extra pressure? How come the church has that effect?
Because the church is made up of human beings who are in the process of transformation and who also have their own personal desires and needs, it's so very easy to always ask for jerseys, autographs, selfies, to be like the world, to be like everyone else. And some athletes really suffer from this because they are not seen for who they truly are. Also, when people come to a church, it's to worship God, not to be worshipped themselves.
So, how could the church react in various ways or actually be a real support and provide meaningful assistance for these athletes?
Reading the Epistle of James, for example, by not giving places of honor to certain people. But we're all on the same starting line, and we're all eventually going to be called to end up on our knees before God because, in the end, the glory ultimately goes to Him.
You started Holistic Sport, the first chaplaincy for athletes in France. Today, how are the missions of the different chaplains divided? Who are they? Where do they go? And where do they come from?
So they come from all over France, from Europe as part of Francophonie. We have connections in Switzerland, to Africa, in Mali, where we have an academy for young soccer players, where Muslims and Christians are alongside, and we offer chaplaincy in that context. And then they are all over France. We're a bit specialized in different sports because we each have our backgrounds. Even though I'm a soccer player, I don't just support soccer players. Some support handball players, some are more specialized in golf, basketball. And we try to have groups and times where they can all come together. So that's more the mentoring aspect we have. Then there's the specifically chaplaincy part, where last year we were in Paris a year ago to build the first sports chaplaincy at an international competition in France with an international and multi-faith chaplaincy. It was at Charletti Stadium, so it was a first time for France in a secular context. So when you see how complex it was to set up a chaplaincy during the games, it happened through the fruit of 10 years of relationships in the sports world for the second biggest sporting event in the world of parasports after the Paralympic Games. And it was a chaplaincy that worked really well.
And you were telling us earlier that no matter how accomplished they are, athletes can sometimes feel a big emptiness. How can we ultimately love these athletes? Do they want to be loved for who they are in their lives more than for what they do and their performances?
They build themselves up by being loved for what they do because sports produce a performance. And it's this performance that we exalt and cheer for, but it's also the underperformance that we criticize. So it's definitely complicated, and I think Christianity offers this notion of unconditional love. And this love is also relational, and God loves us even when we were not lovable. In fact, He's the one who takes that step towards us, and it's this love that fulfills, this love that transforms. So it's this kind welcome of being able to accept the athlete with their underperformance. And that's the whole message of the gospel, which is both difficult because the gospel isn't a performance we can do for God, but it's what God has already done by sending His Son to perform on the cross for us.
You talked about supporting athletes of all levels and all sports disciplines in various ways. But let's get back to the sport of soccer, since you're personally involved in the sport of soccer because of your background in that particular field. Soccer and faith. Do you find a connection there between soccer and faith?
You can make all the interconnections you want. Anything is always possible. Well, I can absolutely do it. It depends on what direction you want, what you're actually thinking about, for example.
Do you find parallels in football that you also see in faith and vice versa, which help you keep up the pace between your passion and admiration for football and the nobility of the sport, and at the same time, your love for faith and everything that comes with it?
Soccer, like team sports, are indeed very interesting sports, and you can see that when the Apostle Paul talks to us about the body and unity. Is the hand going to criticize the mouth or the eyes? Actually, each one has a specific role, and in soccer, you have to understand that everyone needs to stay in their place and that each role is useful, even if today we develop stats and individualize this sport a lot. But we see the notion of coordination and synergy. Indeed, you can learn things through this sport. And I definitely think sports are a great way to work on our character and can be a place for transformation. There are a lot of connections to be made, but sports bring out the best and the worst in people.
What's the best that you can actually find?
Courage, helping each other out, encouragement, which isn't very French, but something we need to work on. But actually we can push ourselves and then push our limits somewhere. Tell ourselves we can do better, have that desire for progress that we also find. In the Gospels, we need to make progress. The goal isn't to plateau in our lives.
Joel Thibault, we have fans listening to us, athletes who are transitioning to a higher level and moving more and more towards professionalizing their sport, currently tuning into Fair FM. What would be your words of blessings and of encouragement? Let's put it that way, so they can fully embrace their sports career with the conviction that if that's where they need to be, they can do it in complete peace.
Yeah, so they can realize that God indeed gave them a body with talents, and that this body can also be a way to honor and glorify God. So they don't forget to set the right priorities and spend time on spiritual training somewhere, ensuring and making sure they also spend as much time with God in the spiritual training as they do training their bodies, and that the two are actually connected and not separate from each other. I usually tell athletes, Don't leave your healthy mind in the locker room.
Thanks a lot, Joel Thibault. Thank you so much.
Thanks.